what we're going to talk about, well, as we go along, you'll see what I'm talking about. But what I'd like you to do is, if there's any challenge or question you have, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we hope to have some time at the end to have a discussion about some of the things that may come up there. So, what am I talking about with legalism in the home? We've heard quite a bit about legalism. In fact, that's one of the challenges we have in our experience here of faith. I've spoken to some of my friends in the One True God movement, and one of the conclusions I've come to is that if the table covering is the Trinity doctrine, legalism is the table. And the table is a much more insidious problem than the table covering. Even many people who overcome the Trinity doctrine mindset still are caught up in a legalistic way of thinking. And the place that is most evidently manifested is in our home. So let me just do a quick review of what legalism is. Legalism is living in reference to the law. And as I put it, law can be represented in different ways. Law can be rules or it could be principles. So what I'm talking about is living in reference to rules. That means rules are the things that people focus on when they're trying to decide what is right from wrong. Another way of thinking of legalism is operating as if actions determine righteousness. Operating as if actions determine righteousness. And if we go even bigger than that, legalism is really operating as if actions are what determine worth. And even more so, this is now more overarching, encompassing, making something other than Christ's life the standard of righteousness. So legalism basically is when Christ's life is not the complete standard of righteousness. We either put something in place of Christ's life for righteousness or in addition to Christ's life for righteousness. That's the concept of what legalism is. And so what I'm going to talk about here is how does that operate in our own homes. So here's some questions I'd like us to think about. You can take a picture of the list of the questions and think about it as we talk about it. How legalistic is my home? Think about your own home as you relate to your family members who are living there, whether they are biological family members or married by marriage or by even people just living in your home, maybe visitors to your home. How legalistic is your home? To what extent does my home environment encourage my family members, particularly the children, to live by grace through faith versus in reference to rules? So, to what extent does my home environment encourage a grace mindset versus a legalistic mindset? And then finally, from those two, how can I encourage a more grace-based home? How can I encourage grace in my home? I hope those three questions are clear. These are questions for that I want us to think about. Now, most of the times when I talk, I think mostly about parents related to children because family life is an important thing for me. But I want us to think about all of our family relationships and even, if possible, spill it out into outside of the home. The topic is legalism at home, but it can, of course, apply outside the home. So there are a couple of passages I want us to refer to. The first one I'm not going to read because it's well known, but I want to make a reference to it. And that first one is the story of the prodigal son. If you recall, in Luke 15, Jesus tells three stories about something that was lost. One was the lost coin, one was the lost sheep, and the other was the lost son. Each of these stories are not focused so much on the item or the individual that is lost. These stories are focused on the person who went searching for the lost one. In the lost coin, the woman went and searched for the coin and then rejoiced when she found the coin and called others to rejoice with them, with her. The sheep, when the sheep was lost, the shepherd left the remaining sheep and went and searched for the lost sheep and brought him back home. In the third situation, the prodigal son left home and came back. The story was not so much about the prodigal son, even though most of the conversation and the description was about him. The story was really about the father, the attitude of the father toward the son. I am not going to focus on that today. I'm going to focus on the attitude of the sons toward the father and toward each other, primarily the older to the younger. So we remember the story of the prodigal son. And the prodigal son Prodigal simply means wasteful or irresponsible. So the older man had two sons, and the younger one, when he came of age, decided that he wants to take his inheritance early and leave and go live his own life. He goes out there and lives his own life, and then everything falls apart. And he sits down and he says to himself, my goodness, I'm here living in this destitution, and my father's servants are living better than me. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go home and I'm going to say to my father, I've messed up. I've dishonored your name. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please just make me one of your servants. And he says, that sounds like a good idea. He goes home and he meets his father. And when he meets his father, let's take a look at what the response is. We are very familiar with the story, but let's take a look at the responses. So this is again Luke chapter 15. I'm going to read for us from verse um, 20. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For my son was dead and is alive again; he was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. So you see, there's two different mindsets here. This younger son had a mindset of, I have messed up and I need to find a way to get back into my father's good graces. The father's mindset is, my son is back, I can rebuild a relationship with him. So the father's mindset was relationship based on his attitude toward the son, his connection with the son, and the son's attitude was legalistic, meaning I need to earn the right to be in a good relationship with the son, father. In fact, it may have been that he was trying to go from servanthood back to the grace of son, and that was seemed reasonable to him. That's me speculating here. So he may be coming along and saying, you know what? He may see me as a servant, and I can be the best servant I can ever be. And then he could look around and say, you know what? It seems like you have proven yourself worthy to be called my son again. I'll take you back into the fold. That's probably how the younger son was feeling. But when the father met him, that wasn't what the father was thinking. All the father was thinking is, I wish my son was back home. So when the son came home, the father was happy to have him home. He didn't care what he did. He just cared that he was back. The son was therefore surprised because that's not what he expected of his father. Because his son had a legalistic mindset when he was growing up, when he was out in the world, when he was on his way back home, when he made his first speech. But when the father showed him grace, he started to understand the father's heart. He did not stop being legalistic until he understood the father's heart. The story continues. It says, now the elder son, this is verse 25. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said unto him, Thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And listens to the response. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore he came out his father and entreated him, to ask him to come in. And he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as his son, thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. So now look at the firstborn son's perspective. Again, he's looking at behavior. I think someone's mic is unmuted. Giselle, can you mute your mic, please? So he's looking at behavior. He's using behavior as a standard of worth. He's using what the younger son did as a means of saying he should no longer be welcome back. He has not earned the right to be called your son. He's not been earned the right to be called my brother. And one of the ways legalism operates in our homes is that we put on the burden on the people in our homes to earn the right to be forgiven. So what happens many times is the people in our own environment, they feel like the prodigal son who's been out in the world because we treat them the way the older brother had attitude was toward the younger brother. They have to prove their right. And there's a reason for that. Legalism thinks about what people are getting away with. In fact, one of the times there's a story in the Bible where one of the apostles, I think it was Peter, came to Jesus and said, how many times should my neighbor offend me and I forgive him? And at that time, I believe the standard was like 3 times, and then 3 times was like going extra. And so Peter thought, let me add on a little bit more. Let me go 7 times. Should my neighbor offend me 7 times and I forgive him? And Jesus turned to him and said, not 7 times, but remember what he said? Not 7 times, but 70 times 7. What Jesus was saying to Peter is, your mindset is wrong. You're looking at what the other person gets away with you. That's not how God looks at us. God looks at us as, how many times can I bring him back? Can I bring this person back? If the person comes back, I'm taking him back. The prodigal son came home because he knew that his father would take him back. But he did not understand why his father would take him back. His father took him back because the father loved him beyond what he did. The prodigal came back because it was a cost-benefit analysis. It's better to live in a home under the rules of the father than to live out there and fall apart on my own. But he still did not understand the father's mindset. The older one didn't leave. He didn't understand the father's mindset because he was talking about what he did and how he lived according to the commandments. He didn't break any of the rules. And then he turned around and said, you did not reward me with anything. You haven't given me anything so that I could go enjoy time with my friends. And that indicated again that he misunderstood his place in the home. While he was a son, he thought of himself in the same way as a servant. There's a servant with special privileges. And so we have to make sure that we are not passing that mindset on to our own family members. I'll talk a little about that a little bit more a little later. So the story continues. And he said to him, that's the father now speaking to the older son, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. So the older one misunderstood his relationship. He thought he needed permission when he didn't have to ask permission. He had rights as a son, and he was so caught up in serving that he missed the privileges of being a son. And that's why he was so judgmental against his brother, because he saw his brother getting privileges that he didn't earn, and he wasn't earning all those privileges and not receiving them, not realizing that he had them, but he wasn't taking advantage because his mindset was wrong. He was legalistic. So the father told him, listen, you didn't have to put yourself through all of that. You didn't even have to ask for permission. All that I have is yours. And he goes on to say it was a suitable that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found. So we see there the contrast between the two mindsets, the grace mindset of the father and the legalistic mindset of the older and the younger brothers. Note here that the father did not change. The sons were the ones who misunderstood the relationship. They had a misunderstanding of why the father related to them the way they did. And as a result, they related to the father incorrectly and related to each other incorrectly. Here's the other thing. Ask yourself this question. Before the prodigal son left home and you asked him, what was your father like? What would he have said? Think about that for a moment. Do you think his answer would have been different from the older brother's answer? Here's what I think their answers would have been. They would have said about their father, our father is a just man, he's a good man, he has some really strong standards which are good for all of us. But to be fair, sometimes they're a little burdensome to live up to. The standards he has feel like they're a little challenging. All right. Um, and so they would have understood part of the father's character, but they wouldn't have understood the father's heart. They would have known that the father is just, but they wouldn't have understood the father's love. And we know that because of how they responded when one of them messed up. If you were to go out then when the younger brother was out and enjoying his life and you asked him that question, he would have done the same thing. But watch this. The next morning after he returned, the younger brother gets back home. If he had gone out into the community and someone asked him, "What is your father like?" having now experienced being received back into the home, would his answer have been the same as before? The answer, of course, would have been no, because now he understood the father's heart. He would have said to the person, "Listen, I did not understand how much my father loved me. When I went out there and I did my own thing and thought I'd squandered all of my opportunities to be even considered his son, he welcomed me back home, and all that he cared about was that I was back home with him. I just want to be just like him." His mindset would have changed because now he would have seen the father for who the father is. Here's another little question. If the father had asked the younger brother to do something in the home, son, please clean up the kitchen for me, and wash the dishes and wipe the stove off, let's just say, how would the son have responded? He would have done it, but with a grudge. He would have done it exactly as he was told. Wash the dishes, wipe the stove off. Oh, that didn't say wipe the floor. So as long as I wash the dishes and wipe the stove off, I'm obeying what he told me to do. I'm carrying out the commands and the rules. But when he comes back home, now when he left and came back home and is welcome back, the next morning if the father said to him, "Son, can you wash the dishes for me?" He would have gone in there, washed the dishes, wiped the store, wiped the floor, make sure everything is in order. He would have done everything to the extra mile, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude and appreciation for the love that his father has for him. The Bible says in 1 John 4, verse 19, we love him because he first loved us. Jesus said in another case, whom the one who is loved, who is forgiven much, loves much. So the challenge we have here is we have to start going outside of the legalistic mindset in our own homes. A lot of times we talk grace in Bible study, but are we talking grace in our homes, or are we legalistic in our relating to each other, to our children? Before I talk a little bit more about that, let's take a look at another passage here. Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. And I dare say, I'm going to say something that's a little controversial. There is a place for legalism in the home. There is a place for legalism in the home. And it's only for a temporary case. And that's why I put the heading here as Old Testament versus New Testament. When God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he brought them out because he had a plan for them over time. But that plan needed time to be effected. So he had to set up a standard of rules and laws, and it chose a mediator of the law to give the law to the Jews, to the Israelites, the Hebrews. That was Moses. And I think Galatians 2 talks about Moses as the mediator of the old covenant on which the laws are built. God gave the laws and he gave it through Moses. In Galatians 4, Paul goes on to say this. Now I say that the heir, that means the person who was born from the father, the one who owns all things. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so, we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of this world. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because you are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. All right? Let me go in verse 7. Wherefore you are no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then a heir of God through Christ. What are we saying here? So, first of all, we are all born in an Old Testament condition. None of us is born righteous. We are all born unconverted. We're born in the flesh. St. John 1, verse 17 says, we are born according to the will of man, but now when we're reborn, we're converted, we're born of the will of God. Now, when a person is born in the Old Testament condition, they operate, and I put the word need there, sorry about that. They operate based on the elements of this world. So they operate based on rules and instructions. That's because they're born in an Old Testament condition. And the thing is, though, this is important. The purpose of these rules and laws is to bring us to Christ. Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. That means, and you've heard me use this term before, and whenever I speak, you're probably going to hear me use this term. Christ now becomes the reference point. He is now the reference point for righteousness. So when we think about what Galatians 4 verses 1 to 6 is saying, we got to start thinking differently now about how we're looking at our children. You see, in our homes, we have basically two types of people. Let me just end the share here. In our homes, we have two types of people. We have the converted and the unconverted. Now, the converted are people who have received Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. Hopefully, that's not only us, the adults, but the children. But some of us live in homes where they also have the unconverted. We have children who are not of the age where they've received Christ as yet, or we have children who have grown up to be teenagers. Maybe they're 10, 11, 12 years old. They have the opportunity to understand the gospel, but they have not received Christ yet in their lives. They're living by our rules, but they're not living by the life of Christ. Some of us may have older grown children in their late teens, in their 20s. You know, I lived in my mom's home till I was in my mid 20s before I left home. You know what I mean? But at that time I was already a Christian. But I'm saying some of us have children who are grown children who are living at home still. Some of us are people who are like a spouse who is unconverted. We are married to the person, and the person is not has not received the life of Christ. All right, I'm not talking about people of different denominations. I'm talking about people who are non-Christians. So we have people like that in the home, and then we have the converted. Some of them are children who have received Jesus Christ, and some of them are more mature people. How do we relate to those people? And that's what I want to talk about today. So one of the challenges we have is we have a hard time bringing grace into our relationship with the people in our homes. Let me start by talking about the people, the one case where legalism is appropriate. There's one case where legalism is appropriate, and that is the immature unconverted. I'm talking about children, kids like under 5 years old who have not yet been received Jesus Christ, right? So what do we have to do? The Bible says foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. So you have to put corrective measures in the place. You have to put rules in place. You have to put consequences for those rules. You tell that everyone knows about children that after 1 years old, they start testing the boundaries. Am I right or wrong? Everybody knows who has raised children knows about the terrible twos where the child becomes defiant, right? How do you get that child to focus? You have to set rules in place. And what does the child respond to? The child is responding to the rules. The child is legalistic naturally because legalism is about me getting away with as much as I can get away with. What do we do as parents is we set the rules in place, and here's where we fall short. We then make the rules so structured that we don't have the purpose to move the child away from the rules to the principles, from the principles to the person behind the principles, which is God. So the child at 3 years old is obeying the rules because mommy says and daddy says. But when the child is 10 years old, they're still obeying the rules because mommy says and daddy says. The child has not learned to move away from the legalistic mindset. They still have the mindset of, I don't want to disappoint mom and dad. And so what they do is they start hiding. They're good children when they're in your presence, but they go behind the scenes and do their own thing. They, sneak out and go hang out with friends. You know what I mean? They sneak their phone into their room and they're playing video games on Friday night. Are you with me, folks? Why? Because in their minds, the person that they need to impress is mom and dad. And remember what I said about legalism. Legalism is the mindset. It's the mindset that something other than Christ's life is the standard of righteousness. So ask yourself this question: are the members of your family, whether it's a spouse or a sibling or your child, are they looking to a human standard for what is right or wrong, or are they looking to Christ for what is right and wrong? When a child disobeys you, do they get worried or concerned because you will get upset? Or do they start thinking, you know what? I have hurt my Father in heaven. Because if their focus is on impressing mom and dad, the child is legalistic. So let me continue here. So you set the rules in place, but the rules are not permanent. The rules are temporary to move them to the right focus, to change their reference point. A child cannot help but making you the reference point. Let me give a little side note here as to why that is. God has designed us to not be convinced first by information, but by relationship. The layers of convincing goes like this. First, a person builds a relationship. Then in the context of that relationship, they have experiences. And then in the context of those experiences and relationship, they interpret information. Are you with me, everyone? When a child is born into the world, they don't even understand language. All they understand is relationship. They understand that when they cry and mom comes and hold them, they feel secure. In fact, there's an understanding now, correctly so, that when a child is younger than 1 year old, the parent should hold them whenever they cry, because the child does not understand the world. They only understand their little environment, and you are their reference point for security. So the parent comes on and gives comfort to the child so that they can feel secure and safe. But at a certain point, the child now starts exerting their own autonomy and they start pushing out. And that's where now the parent has to start implementing certain experiences to let them recognize their boundaries that they need to recognize. That's where the rules come in. And what those boundaries allow the child to do is to say, hold on a minute, if I do this, it causes harm or hurt, I shouldn't do that. All right? And that now keeps the child focused, but even that is temporary. The purpose of that is to get the child's attention to focus them on the principles of right and wrong, and the principles are based on the person. So when the child is 2 years old or 1 year old, it's appropriate to tell the child, don't do that because I said so, because that's what mom says. But when the child is 4 year old, they should be hearing, don't do that because this is not what's right for you. This is what God prefers for you. All right? We should not be having them use us as a reference point eventually. We should be moving that reference point from us to Christ. As John the Baptist said, he must increase and I must decrease. That doesn't happen by accident. That takes purposefulness. When you create your discipline plan for your child, you must be asking yourself, how can I move this child away from me as their reference or the rules as their reference to Christ as their reference? If we are not doing that deliberately, our children will be legalistic. Now, what about the others? What about the other people that we mentioned? The child who has now received Christ. They've been baptized or they've been born again. They've received the Spirit of Christ, and they still mess up. They believe that Jesus Christ has saved them from sin. They've prayed the prayer of salvation, and they still tell a lie. They still disobey you. How do you respond to that? That's a challenging question, because our default is to get them back in line with our rules. And we start talking to them like they are unconverted. We said, because you've broken this rule, I will have to punish you here. But maybe we should stop and start thinking, maybe I should not be talking to them that way. It's not that you shouldn't carry out consequences for their behavior, but you have to start having them thinking about their responsibility, not to you, but to whom? But to God. So, son, you lied to me about the situation that went on at school. Now, I am not here as your Holy Spirit. I am disappointed, but I don't want you to be concerned about my disappointment. I want you to understand that when you lied, that indicates a problem between you and God. All right? God is not disowning you as his child because you've lied. But understand that God wants to reconcile the relationship with you. So let's pray about this lying and leave it in God's hands. Now, I have some boundaries in place, and if you violate the boundaries, there's some consequences there. But those boundaries and consequences are not what determine right and wrong. Your relationship with God is what I want to focus on. We start talking to the child about the relationship with God, not us as the standard. If my child at 10 years old is worried about disappointing me more than the child is concerned about their relationship with God, then I am their standard and the child is going to be a legalist. Now, one of the problems we have with that is the challenges we have while we have that legalistic mindset in our home is we don't really trust God with our family members. What do I mean by that? We want to have a sense of influence or control over our family members. And it even comes off when we are dealing with an unconverted spouse, for example, where sometimes we're trying to preach the gospel to them at every turn because we want them to be saved. But what happens is remember, they're not processing it from the perspective of having received Christ. They're processing it from an Old Testament mindset. So now what they're doing is they're resisting what we're trying to share with them because they don't have the relationship. So how do we relate to that? In fact, the Bible does talk about that particular case. First Peter chapter 3. I'm going to read verses 1 to 7. I think I'll bring it up on the screen. First Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. And let me see if I can bring it up here. And it said in all of these situations, notice I'm not focusing on the person changing their behavior. I'm talking about the person focusing on the relationship. The behavior comes as a result of the relationship. However, if we focus so much on the behavior that we miss the relationship, then we lose both. All right? So, 1 Peter 3, wives likewise be submissive to your own husbands. Now watch carefully this phrase, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. That means respect, really, respectful behavior. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing of gold, or putting on a fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. And then he says, husbands likewise dwell with them, that's your wives, with understanding, giving honor to the wife as the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. All right. So we look at that now, and we look, what if you have a grown child or a spouse who is not converted? How do we relate to them? Again, back to grace. We don't demand certain behavior. Mark, you may have to set some boundaries, and boundaries are not set on other people. Boundaries are what you set on yourself. A boundary is really saying, this is what I will respond to, and this is how I will respond. For example, if I look at Brother Ken and I start calling Brother Ken Brother Roy, Brother Ken is not going to respond. He's not trying to stop me from calling him Roy, but he responds to Ken. That's a boundary he has set on himself. So you set boundaries and you say, these are things that I will accept and these are things that I'm not going to accept. But when it comes now to their behavior, your relationship needs to be a relationship of grace. I'm going to use an illustration I learned from Sister Diane that I think is a very profound illustration to illustrate the power of grace to overcome the legalistic mindset. And she's telling me a story that she heard from somewhere else, but I think I have the gist of the story. So there was this gentleman, he was a non-Christian, and his wife was a Christian. And he would go out and hang out with his friends and drink and, do his stuff as a non-Christian man. And one night he was out and he was drinking and hanging out with his friends at the bar, and it became up to like 1 o'clock at night. All right. Like, I got you, Ken. He says, just don't call him late for dinner. All right. So the husband was there with his friends, and they're going home, and they're loopy, they're drunk, and he says to his friends, come with me, we're going home to my home and I'll have my wife cook something for you. And his friend says, what, are you crazy? It's 1 o'clock at night. Otherwise would never do that. They would be very upset with us. And the man, they brought them home to his home, and he woke up his wife out of sleep at 1 o'clock at night. She gets up with a smile on her face and prepares a meal for him and his friends. And when they were finished and they left home, they went to sleep. The next morning, it started working on his heart. And he said to her, babe, why did you do that last night? Why weren't you upset with me when I brought all my friends and woke you up in the middle of the night to cook a meal for me? And she said to him, honey, I love you. I love you with all my heart. And I love God even more. Which means that when Christ returns, I'm going to go to heaven and I'm going to live forever with him. But you are not a Christian. You've rejected Christ, or you have not accepted Christ. Which means when Christ returns, you're not going to go to heaven. So what I've decided is that I'm going to make this time on earth that you have as much heaven as I can. Are you with me, everyone? That's the message she gave to her husband. How do you think he responded to that? His whole perspective changed. And as a result of her submitting to him, as a response to her submission to her Heavenly Father, he had a new perspective of God and he was converted. What if she was upset with him because of how disrespectful he was to her? As a result of her showing grace when he didn't deserve it, like the prodigal son's father, the good father, did toward him, she was able to open up the way for him to really see God as to how God sees him. That's what we need to be like in our own homes. We need to start being more gracious. Another reason that many of us have a legalistic mindset at home is because of how we've been grown up. We find ourselves defaulting to the way that we were raised. We were raised with strict rules. We were raised with the laws, and you make sure that you don't do this thing on the Sabbath and so on. And that's how we talk to our children. That's not allowed. Don't do this and so on, because we want to keep them from going too far off the deep end. That's legalistic. because what happened is we are not deliberate. We're not careful about allowing our history that has conditioned our way of thinking to overcome our new understanding of grace. Our mindset is still carnal instead of spiritual. So when our child or spouse or our sibling or loved ones does something that we find to be wrong or it is deliberately wrong, they curse around us. We wince and we want to correct them and we want to stop them and we're going to say that you shouldn't be doing that and so on. Instead of stopping and thinking, how can I respond in such a way that this person has a clearer view of God? What if you had a neighbor who was racist? All right, and I know a lot of people here are very concerned with racism. What if you have a neighbor who was racist, and you come out and that person keeps saying bad things about you, whoever you are? It could be a white person toward a black person, or a black person toward a white person, or against an Asian, or whatever. It could be racism is among all cultures. Well, let's say you had a racist neighbor, and then you go out one day and you see that you see that your neighbor is struggling and having a really hard time getting something done. What would be your response? What's the grace response? Would you focus on the person's racism, or would you go to the person and say, let me help you? And what if the person curses you out and say, you know what, I don't want to have anything to do with you? You know what I mean? What would be your response? Would you say, you know what, you deserve what you get, suffer alone? That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, if your enemy needs to go, you to go with them 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Why? Paul explains it. Our perspective in Romans, our perspective is not to get along with our neighbors. Our perspective is to get our neighbors connected with God. I am not concerned about my neighbor hating me or loving me. If that neighbor ends up in heaven, then we'll love each other forever. One of the things I thought about with missionaries, if I may take a quick detour here, is that there are many missionaries who the last person they saw was the person who murdered them. That means they were on the mission field and they're doing the work of God, and the response they got was to be killed for the gospel. And those people are going to go to heaven, and one of the first people they're going to see is the person that killed them. Do you believe that that person in heaven is gonna, the missionary is gonna be upset about being killed by this person? The idea is this: the person who has received Christ is as eternity to build a relationship with me. But the person who has not received Christ, no matter how good the relationship I have with them, it's only temporary. What do we want? A temporary relationship now, or a permanent relationship forever? And legalism only creates temporary relationships. Grace creates permanent relationships. So my charge to us is this: start being aware of our own legalism in the way we relate to each other. We like to think of ourselves as the prodigal who has come home, but maybe we should start wondering, maybe I am the older brother that needs to start thinking of the prodigal as my brother. You know? And so we have to start changing our language, start using more grace-based, relationship-based language, especially when it's time to confront the other. We have to start removing condemnation from our relationships. We have to start being like Jesus with the woman at the well. We have to start being like Jesus with Peter after Peter had had betrayed him. All right? And don't try to be God to people. Try to be like God. Try to be like Christ, pointing people to God. Jesus says, if I am lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. Right? While we are providing guidance to our children and to our loved ones who are grown, remember that it's the Holy Spirit that converts people. There's an old saying, preach the gospel always, use words where necessary. And remember, Before a person can hear you, what you're trying to say, they see your actions first. The relationship is the context for the behavior, and the behavior and the relationship is the context for which we receive information. If a person knows that you love them, they are more willing to hear what you have to say. We believe who we trust. We trust who we like. And we love those we believe love us. We love him because he first loved us. Brother Ian said, what if the neighbor refuses the help? It's an interesting thing about that, What if you have a person who's mean and angry and nasty and refuses the help? You know what you do? You help as much as you can. And then when you can't help anymore, you back off. And guess what? There's another time that God will open up that door again. Because we are not the ones that control this stuff. We're agents of the Holy Spirit. The Bible says in Romans, if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and you will heap coals of fire on his head. Because the best way to get rid of your enemy, this is a separate quote, the best way to get rid of your enemy is to make them your friends. But there's a better way to get rid of your enemy, is to make them friends with God. If your neighbor doesn't see you correctly and start seeing God correctly, they'll start seeing you correctly. And I thank you so much, Brother Ken. Consistency is the key as well. We are sharing the message of the gospel consistently through our actions and using words of grace. Don't try to call them into the gospel. Don't try to preach the gospel at them with words. Be like what First Peter 3 says. I know Peter 3 was talking about husbands to wives and wives to husbands, but this applies to parents to children. And let them realize that it's God's love that we want to share with them. Leon says, only by love is love awakened. I want to add something to that, Brother Leon. Only by God's love is love awakened. We don't want to be the reference point for our children or our family members. That's legalism. And if you look and find that that's what's going on in your home, you know what's going on in your home. Then there's work for you to do as a missionary for Christ in your home. Remember, Christ said, if I be lifted up, Christ is talking of himself, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. So when our neighbors, our family members, our children, our spouses, and even our parents in some case, disappoint us, don't worry about that. We want them to have the relationship with Christ. Go to Christ and say, Lord, they've disappointed me, but I'm not important. What can I do to build their relationship with you? And let's start moving our homes from having a legalistic older son mindset to a grace-based loving father mindset. Build a home of warmth and welcoming filled with grace all around. When that happens, then the Holy Spirit can do wonderful things in our homes. Let's pray.